Now let's get back to the problem that, in a sense, creates. Our difficulty is this. Science, which proves itself immensely powerful in describing the world, consists of statements about what is the case. Also, what must be the case. There are law-like statements. But what is missing from science is any notion of value, any notion of what ought to be the case. Right? Take a physics course. You will learn various laws, various facts about the mass of an electron and so on. Try asking a moral question. Say, Professor, is it good or bad that electrons have that particular mass? Okay, the intensity of light is governed by this inverse square law, I understand that, but, is that a good thing? Wouldn't it be better for like an inverse cube law? That's not part of science. Scientists don't think about whether it's good or bad that electrons have that particular mass, it just is. And so there are thoughts that emerge from the Enlightenment, from the development of science, and then from the immense progress that resulted from the scientific revolution in the agricultural and industrial revolutions. They really fundamentally shape the ideas of the 20th century. So what are these thoughts? The first is this gap between is and ought, between fact and value, between description and prescription. So science seems to merely describe the world. It tells us what is. It tells us what the facts are. But we can also ask what we ought to do, what kind of people we ought to be. And science doesn't try to answer those questions. It's not clear that it can. That's not part of its domain. But here's the thought. Initially you might say, all right, science does this, morality does this. However, the growth of technology started making more and more people think, actually, science describes the world completely. All you need is the is. All you need are the facts. All you need is this scientific description of the world. That's a full account of the world. And if you think that, then it looks like there is no place for the ought, no place for right and wrong, no place for justice and injustice, no place for vice and virtue. So you might think of terms being divided in this sort of way. Some of our terms that we use are purely descriptive. If I say, I have 5 fingers, that is purely descriptive. On this hand, I mean. 10 fingers overall, luckily. That purely describes things, right? It does not evaluate. There are other things that are purely normative, purely evaluative. I say good, bad. I say just, unjust. But then there are lots of things that are thick, that contain descriptive and normative elements together. If I say, wow, that was brave, I'm partly commending it, right? I'm saying it's a good thing. But I'm also giving you something of a description of what it was like. You get some sense of what a brave or courageous action is. And so a term like brave or courageous, or for that matter, wise or foolish or, generous, lots of terms like that, really are kind of descriptive and kind of normative together. So here are some that I think are purely thin and normative. Bad, good, evil, right, wrong, should, ought, may, must, virtue, vice, obligation, permission. All of those things are really just talking about what ought to be the case. They're not describing anything, right? It's just purely an evaluative term. The thick ones are things like courage, integrity, honesty, generosity, sincerity, kindness, prudence, foolishness, rashness, laziness. Those are partly descriptive and partly normative. If I call somebody lazy, that's partly describing them, but it's also partly doing it in a way that implies that that's bad. And so that's a kind of thick normative term. But all of those compare the way the world is with the way the world ought to be. And that's something special about this ought. Now, where does the ought come from? How do we understand these ought judgments, these evaluative terms, these things that involve, either a positive evaluation, like courageous or good, or maybe a negative one, like evil or cowardly or something like that? How do we understand those in a world that we might think is completely described by science? This is the problem that David Hume identifies and writes about as part of the Scottish Enlightenment near the end of the 18th century. Hume wrote when he was only very young. He was only 23 when he published this long book, A Treatise of Human Nature. It's one of the great works of Western philosophy. He himself was very disappointed. Initially, nobody paid it any attention. He himself later wrote, it fell stillborn from the press. And later he wrote a sort of précium, but a much shorter book giving its main ideas. But it turned out to be one of the most influential books in Western philosophy. And as you can see from my copy there, it's well loved, or at any rate, well abused. Now, here is his idea. What is morality? What are these judgments about good and bad, brave and cowardly? These things where we actually compare the way the world is to the way it ought to be. Well, he says morals clearly have an influence on our actions and affections. If I say something is good or bad, I'm influenced by that, and I might be trying to influence others. But reason alone has no such influence. So he says morality is not a conclusion of reason. It consists of no matter of fact. If I say something is good or bad, I'm not describing a fact about it. I'm doing something else. Okay, now what am I doing? Well, if I say something is good, yeah, you don't really have any image of your mind, right? In your mind, right? If I say, oh, wow, somebody threw something at me, and it turned out to be an unusually large blue football. You have an image in your mind, right? It's kind of weird, a large blue football, but nevertheless, you can get an image of what that's like. Then I say, ah, yes, something happened this morning. What? It was good. You don't know what yet, right? There's no image in your mind, there's no description, it's purely evaluative. And he says, is that something that's a conclusion of reason? Is it a fact about the thing? No, it's something else. So here is Hume, in the most famous passage where he's talking about this. He is Scottish, remember. In every system of morality I've met, I've noticed that the author proceeds for some time, reasoning in the ordinary way, to establish the existence of a God, ranking points about human affairs, and then he suddenly surprises me by moving from propositions with the usual copula is or is not, to ones that are connected by ought or ought not. This seems like a very small change, but it's highly important, for as this ought or ought not expresses some new relation or affirmation, it needs to be pointed out and explained. A reason should be given for how this new relation can be, inconceivably, a deduction from others that are entirely different from it. Okay, now, thank you. It's very interesting. People in the United States generally find it amusing when I imitate accents, which I'm very fond of doing. The father of my best friend, when I was in junior high school and college, was an actor. Well, he was then a dean of a university, but he had been an actor, and he loved doing accents. So I learned at a young age to enjoy doing this. Now, I'm bad at it, I admit. And people who are Scottish, usually think, oh, that's the worst Scottish accent I've ever heard, but nevertheless, I have fun doing it. I have found that in Europe, it upsets people. And so let me say here, for my European viewers, that I do not mean to cast any aspersions on the Scottish people or the way they talk or anything like that, right? I don't mean, well, anyway, you get the idea. I'm trying to be funny. Now, so moral reasoning goes from is and is not to ought, not. But how do we do it? How do we go from is to ought, or from is to ought not, right? How do you go from a description to an evaluation? Well, he says reason doesn't supply any connection. And so we've got something like the underpant problem, okay? Phase 1, steal underpants. Phase 2, question mark. Phase 3, profits, is the way that it goes in the South Park episode. Well, here it goes like this. Phase 1, description. And we just get a bunch of things with an is. Conclusion. Phase 3 is normativity. We get an ought. We get a good, bad, just, unjust. And then, how do we get from one to the other? What's phase 2? Now, well, how do we do it? There are all sorts of different answers possible. But Hume starts asking, well, let's take some cases. Why is cruelty wrong? Why is generosity good? He says, no matter of fact is to be found. No. Here's person A. A starving cat comes to their doorstep. They look at it and they say, away, you mangy beast. Slam the door in his face. Here is person B. They say, oh, you poor kitty cat. And they take it home, and they feed it, and they love it. Okay? Now, what takes you from a pure description like that to any evaluation of those actions? Yes? The emotion, exactly right. I describe the person who says, "Away, you mangy cat," and slams the door. What emotion do you feel as I describe that situation? Yeah, you might think, "Oh, poor cat," right? Maybe it's an emotion of sympathy, or maybe it's anger. Maybe you think, "What a mean person." What about the person who says, "Oh, you poor kitty cat," picks it up, feeds it, bathes it, pets it, it starts purring. You say, "Oh," right? Okay. I mean, maybe you're not a cat person. Substitute some other animal or some whatever to get the desired result. But the idea is, it's emotion, it's feeling. He says, "'Tis the object of feeling, not of reason. It lies in yourself, not in the object." So it's really something in you. He says, "An action or sentiment or character is virtuous or vicious." Why? Because its view causes a pleasure or an uneasiness of a certain kind. You see the person exhibiting generosity and you feel good inside. You see a person being mean or being cruel, you feel bad inside. And he says that's what makes the difference. It is a matter of feeling, of emotion. So feeling is what takes you from is to ought. So that's phase 2, the feelings. At one point he says, here's the difference. You see somebody murder somebody else. Actually, my grandfather witnessed a murder when he was 6 years old. He was telling me this story. He was in his 80s. He said, "Yeah, I was on my way to school, first grade. Saw this guy stab another guy right in the corner of Butler Street." I said, "Wow, Grandpa, what did you do?" He said, "I had to get to school." Wow, okay. Now, that arouses a feeling in you, right? The feeling of the murder. That arouses a feeling of what? Well, shock, anger, fear maybe? Yeah. And the way those negative emotions are grouped together by humans is a feeling of disapprobation, disapproval. On the other hand, an exhibition of generosity might elicit feelings of approval. That's what makes the difference. So he concludes, reason ought to be the slave of the passions. Meaning that, in other words, our rational conclusions about right and wrong, justice and injustice, and so on, really stem from feelings. Feelings, he says, that are not arbitrary, feelings that are part of who we are. Okay, reason in these matters is really the slave of the passions. We start with a feeling that there's something wrong with this. We have a negative feeling. Maybe it's of disapproval. That was bad. And that was bad here isn't really a deduction from rational premises. It is really based on a feeling of disapproval, of fear maybe, of disgust, of anger, of something negative, okay? And other things we approve of and judge to be good. Why? Because they elicit feelings of approval, positive feelings in us. Our moral sense is that capacity we have for having these feelings, for the feelings that constitute the basis of our moral judgments. Now, just as some people lack certain capacities, some people might lack a moral capacity. Hume is not saying that we all have exactly the same sense to the same degree. For example, consider vision. Some people have very, very good vision. A friend of mine is a pilot and has excellent vision. I, without my glasses on, don't have such great vision. I'm sort of farsighted, so in the back row I can tell you're human. In the middle there, you're really just kind of flesh-colored blobs. Well, the glasses are good. They do correct it. But I know some people for whom the glasses don't really correct it. In fact, I know a guy who plays the flute, and he's a mathematician. He's very, very good at both of those things. But when he's playing the flute, if most people would be seeing the music on the stand here and playing here, he's like this. He's that far away from the music. It's astounding, but he has to be to see it. And that's with correction. That's as good as it gets for him. So something like that can happen with our moral sense too. Some people might have a highly tuned moral sense. Others might have no moral sense at all. It's just lacking. And those people we call what? Psychopaths or sociopaths, yeah. I mean, those are people who really just do not have any moral reactions like this. They might see a murder and they just go, It'd be sort of like you see orange juice. And let's say you don't have a strong feeling about orange juice. Or you see a brown table. It's like, hey, it's a brown table. They just see a murder. Like, hey, it's a murder. Okay? No, there's a different kind of, what's the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath? You might say, well, the sociopath says, it's a murder, whatever. And the psychopath says, it's a murder. But anyway, that's not meant to be a deep comment about, well, anyway. Okay. Now here is the underlying problem, and we'll just conclude with this for now. The second thought that underlies the Enlightenment and that generates the problems that we faced in the 20th century is this. The theories developed in the scientific revolution are in many cases two-level theories. That is to say, there is a surface level describing things that are quite observable to us, but they are explained in terms of a deep level. What happens at that deep level that cannot be seen is what explains the things at the surface level. Now, chemistry is like this. You might think, wow, I put this substance together with this substance, and good grief, I get this white precipitate. These were each clear liquids. I put them together. Suddenly it turns cloudy and white. How did that happen? Chemistry gives you an analysis, but not in terms of the things you can see, in terms of the underlying chemical structure you cannot see. So, we're going to witness lots of theories that are like that, which imply what? That the surface level we're seeing is not the one that counts. Put those two ideas together and boom, you get the 20th century.